Hello, everyone, and how are you? Welcome back to another episode of the Wired for Success podcast. So we are back. It's been the holidays. I hope you've missed us. We have missed you, and we have a lot we want to talk about coming back now. So I'm gonna just quickly introduce my colleague Steve Costello and myself, Patience Modebi, and we are the duo for the Wired for Success podcast. So, as you already know, what do? We talk about parents' issues, we talk about teenagers' issues, challenges of every day, and also how to manage them, what to do. And this time, we decided to talk about something that basically everyone goes through, which is anxiety. What we want to talk about is about the fact that anxiety is normal to experience. For parents, for teenagers, it's really normal to go through things because there are so many changes along the line that things will come up and you will experience anxiety. However, where we come in, where Steve and myself come in with our expertise, is that how do you manage it so that the impact on your daily life is causing less distress? That's what we want to talk about. But before we do that, I'm going to quickly pass it on to Steve. And Steve will tell you something because there's something that we always say. And I'm sure I've done it as well, where I say, "Oh, I'm so anxious today. I'm feeling so anxious." There's this thing happening and I'm feeling so anxious. But what does that mean? And am I really feeling anxious or am I feeling something else? Steve, tell us.
Yeah, this do you know what? It's okay to kind of misuse terms because we feel as we feel. And that's the important thing. Being in
Mm,
touch with our feelings, being in touch with what's going on in our mind, and being in touch with what is going on in our body are really important things. And they don't need labels.
it's true.
So, for example, I say to many of my clients, how are you feeling right now in this moment? Not what you're thinking, how are you feeling?
Mm,
And it's quite funny because a lot of people kind of stop and say, oh, I don't normally think like that. So how am I feeling? Well, I've got this strange feeling in my stomach. It's kind of running around a little bit. It feels a bit mixed up. It feels a bit kind of, it was, my grandson put it brilliantly a few days ago. He was feeling a bit nervous about something he was doing on his bike. He said, my tummy's all wheezy, which was great. Brilliant way to put it, and that happens, doesn't it? We get kind of wheezy tummies sometimes when we're feeling a little bit anxious about something.
yes.
So some people do confuse anxiety with stress or stress with anxiety, and it happens. But so let's just be a little bit clear about what we mean when we're talking about anxiety. We're talking about anxiety as a psychological and an emotional state. So it's kind of two things. And the characteristics that go with that include feelings like worry,
Mm,
fear, I just mentioned a moment ago, unease, when we feel, that feeling when you feel really uneasy about something that's happening in your life. And feelings like this, though, can range from so mild that we hardly notice them to really severe, and they're actually debilitating. We can't do anything because of them.
yeah.
And obviously, if we get to that level, then we need to look for support. And what triggers these things? Well, all kinds of specific events or situations. Okay, I was talking about my grandson on a bike. So we're adults, we're a little bit more, we're a little bit beyond that probably. So what triggers these event situations? Because quite often they don't even have an obvious cause.
Mm,
We suddenly feel anxious about something. And if we could stop just for a moment and say, wow, this is interesting. What's making me feel like this? The answer is not always immediate. It's within our experience, obviously, but it's not always an immediate response. And Then we've got the physical stuff as well. Some people will say, my heart's racing, my pulse is going crazy, I've got sweaty palms, I feel really uncomfortable, my neck goes stiff, tense, I feel this tension in my body. There's all kinds of things that happen. Or we might have difficulty concentrating. Somebody recently described it to me as being a little bit like a butterfly. She was landing on one thing and then she took off and landed on something else. And a moment later, she took off and landed on something else. She couldn't keep her thoughts in one place. That is fairly typical of anxiety. Other people will talk about having a sense of impending doom. Wow, that's a big one, isn't it? Imagine this feeling of, doom. It's kind of scary. I don't know about you, but it makes me feel a little bit scared.
Yeah.
This idea of doom coming in. But the thing is, anxiety is a natural response. This is where we link to stress. Anxiety is a natural response to stress. So stress and anxiety aren't the same, but they are related. They kind of work together. And sometimes it can be helpful to feel a little bit of anxiety. We might be preparing for something. We might be preparing for an interview or a race or an examination. There's a ton of things that we might be preparing for, and it's okay. But yet, on the other extreme, anxiety can become chronic. It can become so intense that it interferes with life, the universe, and everything. And that obviously is not a good thing. And sometimes that may require treatment. It may require support of lots of different types. It might be a psychologist, it might be even a psychiatrist, but support may be needed. Anxiety is common. You're not special if you feel anxious.
Yeah.
Well, you are special. We're all special. But you're not broken because you feel anxious about what's going on in your world. Some people suffer from anxiety disorders. They need support for that. Some people suffer from social anxiety. They find difficulty in social situations. They need support for that. Some people panic. So there are extremes. But for the most of us, we feel anxiety from time to time and we sail along and we do just fine. And the anxiety can even be helpful, which is a good thing. So where are we going next, patients? What do you think?
I feel like anxiety often happens with things that are unknown to us, where we feel like we are not, again, we come back to that word, in control. There's no control. Something is happened, it's shaking our world, and we're like, ooh, the doom, like you were saying, the doom is about to happen, and I know, like, obviously we're talking about it really lightly here. The idea is not to be scaring people, but now if, like Steve was saying, you were to take a pause, if we, as we call it, let's call it like that. If you were to take a pause and just question yourself, what is happening here? Oh, I'm feeling this, where am I feeling it in my body? Like Steve grandson was talking about the belly, the belly wobbly, wobbling, all of this kind of things. You are then able to have a little bit more of clarity of, okay, what can I do as a next step? But before we even go to that, what are different scenarios of anxiety for parents or even for teenagers? Let's go with the obvious. It's beginning of September, first day at school. There's so much anxiety for young people, for teenagers. Imagine, especially if they leave the school that they knew for so long. They went primary school, for example, and they went to secondary school, or even they changed school, or their friends are not in their class and they have to make new friends, and they don't want to make new friends. Normally, what I found is people like to have the normal things, like, no, these are my friends and this is my class and things like that. All these unsettling things that are happening in September, it takes time to adjust. We don't talk about it like, oh, he's going to be, you're going to go back to school, so you're going to feel anxious. No parents go and say that immediately to their children, but you know that your children are going through it. And one thing that people forget is that as parents, we also go through anxiety for our children. We feel that anxiety. That anxiety is not gone somewhere else. It's still there in your environment. So you're feeling anxious for your children, your teenagers as well. So this is like a scenario that I'm talking about. But imagine feeling anxious and then feeding this anxiety to your teenager. What happens next in those cases? So let's talk about another scenario. What about health-related scenarios? So if there's a health issue or something that has come up in the family, and because of that, everybody's life has been unsettled. There's no normal. And Steve and I were talking about this before because I'm going through a certain challenge with my son. And this idea that we want to go back to the normal because the normal is what we control, what we know, what we manage. Okay, if something happens there, I know what to do. But the unknown, what happened if he goes in hospital? What happened if this? What happened is that? This is what feeds the anxiety, I feel. So, Steve, in cases like this, what can we do, or what can we advise people to maybe do, except from the pause? We talked about the pause already.
Yeah, I think you made some great points there, Patience, and one that really leaps out is we've got kind of two situations here. We've got the anxiety felt by parents because of what their children are going through or their teen. So let's talk about, I'll just mention a thing about safety. So in relation to the safety of our teens, we may be worried about the peers they're hanging out with. We may have heard that there's exposure to drugs, alcohol, so let's go to extremes a little bit. So we may have heard about that stuff. So it's quite right as a parent that I'm going to feel a bit anxious if my teen is hanging out in a situation like that. But they may also feel anxious because they've got to fit into their peer group. And is this peer group the right place to be? They know what their parent thinks about drugs and all the rest of it. So I know I'm smiling, but so you've got two sets of anxiety, and they're not quite the same. But we need to recognize that. We need to be able to say, hey kids, I'm feeling really anxious about this. This is how it's making me feel. Because, be honest, tell them the story. But how do you feel? What are your thoughts and feelings about this situation? And they may well say, well, actually, I feel really anxious and my friends are hanging out in this group and I don't really want to say that they're wrong to be associated with it, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of possibilities we can go on all day about. But we need to, just going back to where I started, we need to recognize the two types, the two anxieties, the parents and the teens. And we need to, and we've said this a million times, we need to be able to sit down, we need to be able to talk about it openly. So we need to create those places, those safe spaces where it's okay. So if I wade into my 18-year-old daughter and say, you're not hanging out with that group, there's drugs and rock and roll and all kinds of stuff going on, that's not going to help.
It says, yeah.
So,
It's
however,
going to go the wrong direction.
Yeah. So it's better to have a dialogue and have a conversation about it. So we're talking about education. We're talking about the safety issues. What are the safety issues? Let's bring them out into the open. We need to talk about boundaries.
Yeah.
We need to set boundaries, but they need to be agreed boundaries. It's no good me saying to my daughter, you will not hang out with that group, end of story. That doesn't solve anything. I know it might feel that that's what I want to say, but it's really not going to help at the end of the day. So we need to think about the boundaries. We need to make sure that our teams understand the importance of making things like safe choices.
Yeah.
Actually
Completely.
understand, not just this is wrong. They need
Mm.
to understand all the ins and outs of that. It's quite complicated, isn't it? You know, when you think about all the things you need to know about, let's say, smoking cannabis, for example. Parents may not know much about it, apart from in the media, it's considered unhealthy and blah, 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 blah. You know, so there's a lot to know. Sometimes people need to ask for help. That's why, partly why we are here. We have that experience, we have that knowledge, we can deliver that help and that support. And it's okay to say, I don't know anything about this.
Yeah.
It's okay to say, help, because by asking for help, it helps the situation for the parents and for the teams long term. Okay, so we can start by educating.
Yeah.
We can talk about it. We can open the doors, not close doors. I think closing doors is unhealthy.
Yeah. And I like what you say in that sense, because it comes back to an episode we did as well on having resources. Having resources is having either people or information or things that are able, that helping you to manage whatever you are going through. So if you don't know how to deal about with things around drug and rock and roll, as Steve said, um, you could always ask for help and get some support in that way. I agree.
Okay, patience. Have you said you had some examples of
Yeah,
uh,
this
things
was
that
so obviously we talked about the first day at school, but there's also different fears. So I'm going to share one fear that I had when my second son went to started secondary school. He then had to go to school by himself, which means crossing roads, which means strangers on the way, which means I'm not there behind him. I'm not dropping him. I'm not picking him up. I don't know if he's going to come straight home or he's going to be following his friends somewhere else where I don't know where he is. And it's happened on a couple of occasions where he'll be like, I'm at this place. And I'm like, how come you at this place? You never communicated with me that you were at this place. So I had to have the conversation with him and say, it's not that I don't want you to go to wherever you want to go. It's about me knowing where you are so that if there is something happening, like an accident or anything that could be happening, I will know, okay, he's at this place. What do I do? How do I reach him? And this is something that created a lot of anxiety for myself because I've known things happening where people thought their children were somewhere and they were somewhere else. So that created anxiety in myself. But I had to communicate to him that once he's doing that is what's whilst doing that is nothing wrong in itself, it can create consequences where things go wrong.
yeah.
And by communicating this, he was able to know that, oh, all she wants to know is where I am. So then, from then, I think we had a couple of incidents, but after that, he started to call me, Mom, I'm going here, or I'm with this person. Okay, fine. And that lowered my anxiety, like right, right down. And for him, it didn't feel like I was, you know, like basically criticizing or telling him off or anything like that. So again, for him, he felt safe and he felt like, oh, my mom knows I'm there. Everything is all right. I spend my time, then I can come home. Those are little example of how anxiety can come for parents as well. As Steve said about, being with the wrong crowd or even being with friends. You could be with friends and you feel like they don't have the same values as you, and therefore you don't want your children to be with them. But if you think of yourself as a parent, where does those kind of things fit in your life? You can't tell me. You can't tell us that you don't have any friends or acquaintances where you don't share the same values with them. How do you deal with it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just gonna stop there.
Yeah, that's a good point. What was coming to mind as you were talking just now, Patience, was this idea of communication gap. Because I think when we've got a gap in communication, that's where problems do arise
Yeah.
too frequently. And it's crazy because your son wasn't up to no good. He was doing good stuff. He was hanging out with a friend and so on. But we need to make sure there isn't a communication gap.
Yeah.
Because without the gap, there's going to be less anxiety, less conflict, and all kinds of things. So that's something to think about. One of the things that has actually come up for me recently. So as I said, one of my children is 18. She's the youngest, and she's got some plans for the future. She's got some crazy plans for the future and some really cool plans for the future. In short, she's got so many plans flying up around her head at the moment. She's not sure which way she wants to turn, and that's okay. She needs to think about these things. She needs to talk about these things with us. We need to keep communicating because communication seems to be one of the biggest issues around in relation to anxiety. She is quite anxious about choosing the right thing. She almost chose something a couple of weeks ago that probably wasn't going to be the right thing for her. And she became quite anxious about it. And we became anxious because she wasn't really sharing what she was feeling. So we weren't sure which direction she was going to push for. Fortunately, she turned around and said, actually, I shouldn't have pushed that because it's not going to work. So that worked itself out. But one thing that we did learn from that is to say at the very beginning, this is an option. This is how I currently feel about the option. No decision made yet. Let's talk about it. It's quite a simple formula, really. But too often, this is the thing about our kids having anxiety and parents having anxiety. We've got our own anxieties relating to the situation. They're not quite the same. And suddenly we find we're off at tangents. And what happens when we go off at tangents? We have misunderstandings. We may have arguments. We may have all kinds of things happening in the house that we don't need because they're not helpful. So let's keep this idea of communication at the front of our minds. If we're communicating, we're likely to be less anxious. Mm-hmm. Anxiety is not going to go away whilst we've got teens in the house. There's always going to be some around, and that's okay. As I said earlier, a small amount of anxiety can be a good thing. Yeah. It can help. But too much anxiety can make us sick, so we need to keep it balanced. What about supports? So you talked about day one at school, and our teams definitely need some support on day one at school, or in a new school or whatever. But what about when things come up like, this is day one of the year when you're going to be sitting your final exams in school. So it starts as soon as that. I remember clearly at school going into that year group that was the beginning of the exam year. Yeah. And they hit us with it at the very beginning. And it was months away, months and months away. So the pressure started at the start.
Yeah.
And what can we do about that stuff? How do we manage all of that?
You know, it's a good question. I think I feel like um the communication shouldn't just be around the teenagers or the parents. I feel like as a parent, I don't know, it's happened to me. I don't know. I want to give myself as an example, but I think the communication needs to go beyond you and the teen. You can have conversation with the teachers. You can have conversation with the professional who are around your teenager as well, so that there is also a support system that is put in place in school, for example. If your child is really anxious, I'm going to give an example of a parent that I worked with a while ago. So she was really anxious about her children, but the anxiety was at a level that was so high that the children themselves were really anxious as well. So what happened is that they were not able to fulfill even the simple task that they would do. Like, for example, even getting ready to go to school was an issue. Attending school was an issue. Being at school, within the walls of the school was an issue. Every little thing, every little step along the way became a bigger issue than it was supposed to be because the parents already, their level of anxiety was so high. And what pushes this often is the fact that it's the ego. I'm going to say it, sorry. I'm going to say sometimes it's the ego. I want my son or I want my daughter to do well because when they do well, they represent the family and they represent what is mean. But what this created, if we look at it as a domino effect, it created more anxiety. It created not the result the person wanted, and the person looked for a coach for their children. But really, and Steve and I spoke about that before, the coach needed to be for the parents. So Steve already mentioned it. He spoke about safe space. When we talk about safe space, we are not talking about just having a home where your child is coming back to and having food, and which obviously they need to have that, having food and clothes and everything. But what we're talking about is having a safe space where you are able to communicate with your child what you feel, how you come into this, because it's good to give background. What people do, they don't give background. They only say what's happening. Give a background. So I could give a background. Okay, I come from an African family. In our family, this is expected. So that creates this level of anxiety, and therefore, this is why I'm acting this way. But also is recognizing, okay, I'm acting this way. Is it useful or not? How do you recognize that? Again, we come back to the pause. We come back to the pause, but we also reflect on what's been happening. How did your parent, like, for example, if you came from that African background, as I mentioned, and your parents were really strict with you, or they put a lot of the anxiety on you, how did that work for you? How did you manage that yourself? And if you are then doing this to your child, then you did not manage it. Like, we have to be honest here.
Yeah.
So now is how you come back. Like, we have to come back to ground zero and do the work up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you just made some amazing points there, Patience. Points that I think need to be thought about and considered without judgment.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that many of us are not very good at. We're brought up in this world where we're judged all the time, and we begin to judge too. Hardly surprising, really,
Yeah.
because we watch the news, judgments. We listen to politicians, more judgment, and so on and so on, you know. So we need to try to see things openly. And above all, this sort of parenting teens is hard work.
It is.
It's hard work, period, but it's okay. It comes with with its fair share of anxieties too. It's hard work. But, however, whatever you want to say, it also comes with opportunities. Opportunities for us to grow as parent team, opportunities for us to grow as parents or for our teams to grow. There are lots of opportunities if only we will look for them without judgment. Patience, you found an opportunity with your son. Rather than saying, no, you won't go there, hey, just let me know where you are, what you're doing. That was a great opportunity. So there's some trust develops because of that. Good news. So we've got to address all of these concerns, whatever they may be. We've got to be able to communicate. We've got to educate sometimes. We've got to support sometimes. We've got to hold a hand. Sometimes they need that. We forget, don't we? My current 20, how old is he now? 27-year-old son still occasionally needs a hand to hold. Not very often, but he does. He needed it recently. Just a hand to hold. And we've got to remember that they don't get too old to hold their hand or whatever.
And you know what? I love that, what you said. And I want to just add that keep parenting yourself. If you are a parent, keep parenting yourself.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So every parent came with their own generation of things that they thought were the right things as a parent to do. We are doing the same. We are coming with what we think is the best thing to do. I will say, let's keep parenting ourselves. And then we're more able to parent in an open way, in a more open way.
Yeah, brilliant. Love that. So remember, if you need help and support, send us a direct message. You don't need to go public in the comments of a video or a post. Incidentally, there are going to be a series of posts covering some of what we've talked about today and some things that we haven't really talked about today. But they'll all link back to this video as well. So watch out for those. They're going to be on the Wired for Success Facebook page for sure, Wired for Success YouTube, and so on and so forth. They're going to be around. So you'll be able to connect with us through those. But don't hesitate. Send a direct message. You don't need to go public with your questions or your thoughts if you don't want to. That's it for me, Patience.
Yeah, I think it's a great welcome back video. We went straight into the subject, and as Steve said, you don't have to put comments. You can just send a direct message or even email us with your concern. If you have any specific concern related to parental anxiety, be sure to contact us. Remember that when we are doing the podcast, we are only opening up a subject. So we can't go into specificities here because that would be too long, and Steve and I cannot stay there for that. However, what we can do is we can support you with one-to-one work with yourself, with your teenagers, and work on those anxieties, or even how to manage the stress of life, So just contact us if you need, and we will be here in the next episode talking to you about more of the challenges and how to manage them. So thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon. Bye for now.
Take care. Bye.